Hello and welcome to the August 6th meeting of the Asheville Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm your chair, Jeffrey Barton, and we will begin with a roll call.
Chair Barton.
Present.
Commissioner Faircloth.
Present.
Commissioner Zivskaya.
Present.
Commissioner Bell.
Present.
Cycle.
Present.
Commissioner Wheatley.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Palmquist. To begin our meeting with the most difficult thing, we'd like to acknowledge the loss of one of our colleagues on the commission. Just a little over a month ago, our vice chair, Byron Greiner, was lost, and we grieve his loss with his family, closest friends, and from speaking from me, we just sincerely appreciated all that Byron gave to the city through his service on this commission, as well as many other initiatives within the city, Downtown Commission, Asheville Independent Restaurants, and it's a tremendous loss. So it's fitting to kind of pause, reflect, and acknowledge the loss of a cherished colleague in this work of evaluating and making recommendations on land use. With that, I'd just like to open it up for other reflections that my fellow commissioners might like to make, and no obligation to say anything.
I appreciate Chair Barton taking a moment to reflect. Commissioner Greiner and I didn't always see eye to eye on everything. Generationally, I think there were some differences in perspective kind of built in just to the way we operate, but he was steadfast and reliable. Every time I reached out to him, he always answered the phone and communicated his ideas clearly. I learned a lot from him about the history of Asheville and the development of Asheville. He was integral for decades, as far as anything from Belshare, and as that transitioned out to Downtown After 5, and was actively engaged in another board that I'm on, the Asheville Downtown Association, and really was a reservoir of knowledge and integrity. And it was a real pleasure to serve with him, and I think he really reflected the type of ability to keep an open mind and compromise and learn and be engaged in your community for a really extended period of time. So I think it's a major loss, not just for this commission, but for the city, and for the last better than a month now. He's been on my heart and in my thoughts every day. And I just hope everyone who's in his family has the chance to know that we're all thinking about him, and we've all shared private conversation about the impacts he's had in our life.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll just echo what Commissioner Wheatley said. I'm glad we're taking a moment for Byron. While I didn't maybe know him personally outside these rooms, I did know about him within these rooms, not just in this board, but other boards. And a man who's donated, who's given many hours over the years, because these are unpaid positions, to all these volunteer boards and working in the community. And I think I'll take a page out of his book for his commitment to his community.
I don't know that I can eloquently say a whole lot without and keep it together, but I just want to say how important it is to acknowledge us as humans in this work that we do. We're here talking about legal things and planning things and zoning things, but at the end of the day, all we have is each other. And I just want us to remember that in each and every one of these meetings.
Thank you for offering that. Well, thank you for allowing us the space and time to continue our grieving process as a community for the loss of Byron. We'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which, as we have made routine here, is our land acknowledgement. As we are gathering today as the Planning and Zoning Commission, the body tasked with reviewing and advising on appropriate land use in the city of Asheville, it is fitting to acknowledge the storied history of this land. We occupy the land of the Cherokee people who have stewarded and been in relationship with these mountains and waterways from time immemorial. This land is occupied through violence, oppression, coercion, broken treaties, and forced relocation. Please join me in expressing respect and gratitude for the present-day Eastern Band of Cherokee, the Cherokee Nation, the United Gadua Band of Cherokee, and all of our indigenous neighbors, as well as the past and present marginalized community members, as we seek to join in the healing of the indelible trauma that is embedded in this land. Thank you. Next up is the approval of minutes from the June 4th, 2025 meeting. Any comments, corrections? If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
I move to approve the June 4th, 2025 meeting minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next up, we have a standing update from committee liaisons and work groups. Are there any for this month, anything from our stormwater flood task force working group?
Stormwater and floodplain policy working group. Our update is that we are pivoting slightly. So we had tasked ourselves with a pretty heavy lift of reviewing the 25 plus different plans related to floodplain policy and planning. We were, Commissioner Cycle and I, deep diving into not only our UDO on floodplain regulations, but other communities. And we have compiled a lot of information. It's not complete because we have lots of other things going on, but we pivoted because there's a lot of really exciting work in this space starting to happen. And so when we formed this group, we weren't really sure what other efforts in the UDO revisions would be happening. So one reason to kind of pivot to be more of a liaison and a reporting out to this group every month on what's going on in this space is because of the city's application to FEMA's hazard mitigation grant program, HMGP, for funds to review the UDO and potentially make some pretty big changes on the UDO, anything related to floodplain resilience, stormwater, environmental resilience. And so that grant application has been submitted, as far as I know. And it'll probably be several months before that is determined if we get that funding, and then it'll be contracted to a consultant. That's a long process, but a lot of work will be done there, and we don't want to do a lot of work that's just going to be kind of trashed and redone by a consultant. So we're going to be keeping this group updated on that. There's also other groups like the Urban Land Institute that's working with the city on these type of recommendations. So we're just going to keep our ear to the ground and be involved with these other conversations and report out each month on that. Does that capture our plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our hope is in the best role that we can play, since there, like Commissioner Bell said, multiple different avenues in this space now, that we can then pool that. We can have our ears to the ground, and between the two of us, we can pull all the information and just kind of report to this body on updates related to land use policy from those other organizations.
Great, thanks. It's good to see that there may be finally some momentum to have the deep dive into land use policy. So thank you for keeping us updated. Any update from anti-displacement work group?
Yeah, so within the anti-displacement working group, we've identified basically the most important component kind of missing right now within the UDO is really targeting a definition of what displacement is. Right now, we hear the word anti-displacement used quite frequently. Anti-displacement measures can only be pursued if displacement is understood and defined. So we've worked to come up with a definition that we'd like to bring before the group, and I'll say it now. Our request would be that the definition's included in the minutes, and that it could be reflected upon by the full commission, not to be moved towards approval or anything like that, but just reflection and future dialogue. So that definition is, and I'll also email this to Will for accuracy in the minutes. But displacement, as we see it, is the economic, social, cultural, or physical relocation of a people within a defined census tract or within a city-adopted neighborhood. So I think that's really great work as far as trying to set a foundation of understanding around displacement as it relates to the land use policy within the city.
Great, thank you for that. And yeah, I think that does provide kind of some context and foundation for further work to understand implications and applications. So if you could share that with the whole commission and memorialize the definition.
Excellent. Just on another quick note, not quite anti-displacement note, but just on previous work that's been done by this commission, it appears that the land acknowledgement is no longer on the Planning and Zoning Commission landing page for the city. And so I'm sure there was some kind of update to a website or something, but I just wanted to kind of note that right now it appears there's no way to find it unless you go to an agenda and then click a linked document.
Thank you for noting that. Any other liaison work group updates? As just sort of a general public acknowledgement, the city's advisory boards remain suspended at this time, so the workings of Planning and Zoning Commission in relationship to multimodal affordable housing advisory committee is still stymied. So we'll look forward to reconstituted advisory board makeup and opportunity for collective input to kind of help shape the land use discussions in the future.
Yeah, I do think as far as the commission goes, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I know that the city council has moved towards, it appears basically 4 working groups associated with Helene recovery, and I might have overlooked it, but it doesn't look as though, it looks as though the chair and the vice chair from, most of the boards are included in certain components of those 4 recovery boards, but I didn't see the boards necessarily that our chair and vice chair would be included on.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know that they've seated composition or even kind of formalized those committees, but it's worth a question of like, how are these going to be constituted, and where's the opportunity for collaboration and kind of collective discussion? I don't know.
Yeah, I think any policy that's associated with Chapter 7 of the UDO is going to come before this board, and so, any discussion leading up to that would probably be beneficial as far as consensus building for the recommendation from this board.
I had that same question, so.
Okay, we'll pass that along to our council liaison and perhaps through planning staff channels to figure out what the makeup's going to be and when we can sort of volunteer ourselves of the full commission to participate. Sounds good. That concludes our administrative section, and First up, we have a presentation on the affordable housing plan from Sasha Vertinsky.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Sasha Vertinsky. I am the Affordable Housing Officer for the City of Asheville, and I work in the Community and Economic Development Department. I used to be in planning and urban design, so I know some of you. So I was asked to come give a summary of the Affordable Housing Plan. I did not include everything. I'm very aware of your agenda and all these people, lovely people sitting here. And so there's some things I left out, so I will still try to be brief. Our plan was released September 9th, kind of a completed plan. About a year working on this. We had community input, we had focus groups, we did community meetings, we did a community-wide survey, we did an event at the mall, which was really fun to do. We got a lot of input. There are 42 strategies in this plan. We ultimately divided those into top priority, meaning we're going to start working on those right away, short term, which is, I believe, 1 to 3 years, medium term, 3 to 5, and then long term, 5 to 10 years. It will guide our work for the next 5 to 10 years. Here are the 5 big goals of the plan. I don't want to read everything to you all, but promoting, helping existing residents stay in Asheville. We went into this plan, actually, anti-displacement is something we've been talking about at the city for close to 10 years that we've been really concerned about. Preserving existing affordable housing and improving housing quality, increasing the supply of housing that meets the diverse needs of current and future residents, aligning place-based policies and programs with city initiatives, and then broadening and strengthening the affordable housing ecosystem. So not just what we're doing with our money, but how do we interact with all the other stakeholders, service providers, institutions. Two really important cross-cutting priorities that we were considering throughout this plan were incentivizing or supporting efforts that meet the greatest needs. So how do we make the biggest impact for those folks who are the most vulnerable in our community? And then the second one is protecting against displacement. That can be a lot of this physical, economic, cultural, or social. I would add environmental to your list. Flooding, natural disaster, we saw really that can be for both renters and homeowners, right? So it's not just any one particular group of people. Key considerations, I'm not going to read all this. I put some things in here for your consideration that you can read later. Obviously, we've got, in terms of when we're implementing this plan, we think of our internal stakeholders, but obviously we also work with a lot of folks on the external side, service providers, developers, stakeholders, Buncombe County, North Carolina. I should have put philanthropy up here as well. Here's just a smattering of some sample strategies, increasing the acceptance of rental assistance. So you might think of vouchers or veterans, there's vouchers just for veterans or, folks who are disabled, things like that. A lot of times those people face barriers when they go to rent a unit, that landlords don't want to accept rental assistance. They have preconceived notions about who those people are and how they're going to behave in their unit. Building a rental registry and or a centralized affordable housing wait list. We're working on this right now with several external partners. Get emails every week from people looking for a place to rent. Where do I go? And we don't have a place in our community where you can go directly and find all the resources that could help you. So we're working on that with a couple of nonprofits. Expanding home repair resources for homeowners. We've already started working on that. I'll talk about that later. Supporting down payment and mortgage subsidy programs. Creating an acquisition fund for affordable housing, that's probably a little bit more long-term. Sometimes housing comes up on the market and investors generally buy it and maybe rehab it and raise the rents. So there's an idea, and a lot of cities are working on this, like how do we intervene in the market before everything kind of flips and becomes really expensive. Explore land banking to acquire and redevelop properties strategically. Convene and facilitate a funders collaborative. We're working on that right now. Requiring developments that receive city funding to accept rental assistance. That's just a smattering of ideas. And then based on a conversation with your chair and staff, I pulled out specifically strategies that are related to land use. Some of these sound repetitive, so I apologize, but regulatory incentives citywide for affordable housing, reducing barriers citywide, continuing to develop city-owned land for affordable housing, supporting other plans and policy initiatives to diversify housing choices, explore the implementation of a vacancy tax, increasing place-based regulatory incentives, aligning housing development priority with infrastructure investments. So if we know we're going to be doing a lot of infrastructure in one area, maybe we should be looking at that for housing instead. Incentivizing transit-oriented and accessible development, modifying review thresholds, which I know you all have been involved with, and then educating local builders and developers on housing needs, funding and design guidelines. We often hear about people complain to us about how bad, or it can be bad, to deal with the city. So some of it is education. So just a really quick snapshot, what we've been working on in the past year since the storm. So, we came to council the Tuesday night before the storm to talk about affordable housing, and then the storm hit and everything, changed. So we quickly pivoted in the wake of the storm, and we took some returned money and immediately got out, started working on getting $1 million of returned money to rental assistance. And Charities and Grace Covenant Presbyterian and Operation Gateway, they distributed that $1 million pretty quickly. Took several months, but that's how these things go. Home repair, we returned almost $1.5 million in returned funds and turned that towards home repair, storm-related home repair. We have a contract with Archer, which is the Asheville Regional Coalition for Home Repair. That is Mountain Housing, Habitat for Humanity, PODER, Emma, Community Action Opportunities, and the ABCLT. We have a contract with them, and they created this really cool project, really cool collaborative. They've got infrastructure. They're deciding all together who does what jobs. So people have one website they go to apply for home. We're doing monitoring of all our units, which people have been asking us about for the last few years, and we did an awesome job this year. We're going to keep getting better. We evaluated 26 developments with a total of 1,102 affordable units. Some of our units have fallen out of their affordability periods, so they're no longer required to be affordable. Those are the units that are currently required to be affordable because usually either conditional zoning, housing trust fund loan, or a land use incentive grant are the three mechanisms that we have. We are working on 319 Biltmore, which you all reviewed. I want to say it's almost been 2 years since it came to this body. We took that to council for kind of a renewed development deal. They're preparing, it's separated into 2 phases now. One phase will be a 4% tax credit project. Hill, piece of city-owned property we've owned for a long time. We're in an RFP process right now, and it's moving forward very well. Zoning changes, you all know about these. Threshold changes within transit supportive corridors, elimination of minimum parking requirements, and expansion of building size allowances for residential. And then bond planning, we're currently in the midst of planning for our $20 million bond that voters approved last November. So in the coming year, this is a list of what we are focusing on. And so everything I just talked about was in the affordable housing plan, and that's why I'm talking about it. And then So really, we're kind of getting back to the plan and working on these things. Some of these things I just talked about, but we're just going to keep pushing forward on all these strategies as much as we can. We've been invited to join the WNC Affordable Housing Loan Fund, which Self-Help runs. Dogwood Health Trust seeded that fund with $40 million. And basically, those funds take either like philanthropic or city funding. They attract other private capital, like so for banks, and it creates this larger loan pool with low interest rates. So right now, it's focused on multifamily rental development. Really quickly, I don't know if you've heard, there's a new housing needs assessment out. Every 5 years, this gets done as a part of the consolidated plan, which is a plan the city leads for a 4-county region. It's a plan that is really made for how we're going to spend federal funds, CDBG and home dollars. But this will be in your folder, but I just put a link in there for you to find it if you want. It's tons of great data. Patrick Bowen, who did this report, and we used to call it the Bowen Report, I'm trying to say housing needs assessment. He will be in town at the end of the month. He'll be speaking at the city council meeting, the 4th Tuesday at 5 p.m. And then there's also a public presentation earlier that day at Blue Ridge Community College. And then I think the next day, he's actually speaking at the Home Consortium, and that will be streamed on YouTube as well. That'll probably be a pretty in-depth presentation. And this is just my last slide. It's just an example of some of the data that he has put together. So here, there's a brown look at 80%, and this is area median income. I know it's really smashed up numbers here, but around 4,900 units that we need for those at 80% of area median income and below rental units. Around 1,100, closer to 1,200 units for home ownership for those lower example, just to tease. There's tons of demographic data, all kinds of great stuff. I'd be happy to take any questions you have. A lot of text, I apologize.
Thank you, Ms. Vertinsky. Yeah, I think for our purposes, getting a sort of baseline understanding of what the affordable housing plan seeks to accomplish will be helpful as we kind of look at land use regulation. So to start with that, I don't know if this is a question for you or planning staff, is the affordable housing plan an adopted city plan? And if so, will that be used under consistency statements that come before us?
Great question. So it was not adopted, and that was a decision made at a management level, but it has been presented. I don't know about consistency statements. I mean, it's definitely a part of our organizational work plan for the city. We've got work plan goals for the whole city, and it is one of the we'll have a dashboard up, and you'll be able to track the progress of what we're doing with the plan.
Is there a timeline for adopting it formally, or?
I'll try to add some helpful context. We are coming up on what's likely going to be a technical update to our comprehensive plan, in which we will at least be referencing the accepted affordable housing plan, and it is currently referenced in our motions, suggested motions, and staff reports to both this body and City Council when appropriate. A consistency statement, I think, is something that's often kind of coming from general statutes, so it's probably going to just reference the comp plan directly, but you will see staff make reference to this plan and others as well. Sorry, I can't even get these mics right tonight.
Thank you. Any other questions on scope or applicability of this
I have
plan?
one question. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Any additional detail or thoughts or strategies around helping our infrastructure keep up with housing in specific places? roads being to certain standards, stormwater systems in the public right away.
No, I'm not the expert really on that anymore. I mean, I don't know if I ever was, but, I mean, we definitely work internally, you know, with city staff to work on that. You know, affordable housing bond dollars can be spent on infrastructure, but there's so much demand. You know, we've got 20 million, we could really use 100 million, but definitely something we think about, and when we think about where do we fund projects, and are they on major corridors, or at least are they somewhere that makes sense, or are we going to be isolating people in a place where they're without transportation or access? I think there have been some investments in the past that maybe weren't thought out in terms of transit, I guess I'll say.
I don't have a question so much as just a comment. I received some unsolicited feedback on the, and I'm going to get it wrong, but the fund that's being administered through self-help. A private developer reached out and basically just said, you know, that he had received advice from you to go to them to see about the funding through the initial seed fund of Dogwood. And I think he found the process like really satisfying, could immediately set up a meeting, had really smooth transaction as far as access to, you know, underwriting there and having an initial conversation. So I don't know what adding to that broader pool of money might look like, but the initial feedback I received was that the administration that self-help provides is very professional and timely. So that was just something I'd heard.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of the pluses to it, right? They've been underwriting projects for decades, and, you know, they have a depth of experience that we don't necessarily have here at the city. They've got a 90-day turnaround on loan applications, whereas we tend to do this once-a-year cycle, so it's more flexible for developers that way. One downside right now that's being pointed out is that it's only for multifamily rental construction. Consideration moving forward that maybe it could address home ownership. Home ownership's like extra hard.
For sure.
I appreciate the update, and especially the piece around monitoring of the affordable units. I'm wondering if there is a public-facing dashboard for that part?
Isn't. We're actually doing a presentation in 2 weeks at HCD, the Housing and Community Development Committee at Council, about monitoring and what was found, where the units are. That is something we should work on. I mean, I think one of our other focuses this year is data and making sure we're really more transparent, tracking our data.
Yeah, from my perspective as an affordable housing developer, when I look at projects here, that's something that I definitely consider. So that would be helpful, and also helpful to know how many units have aged out, or however you call it, you know, to see like, and what the pipeline is, how many units are going to be going offline in the coming years.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for the presentation. And this was, you know, the request for this, I think, was to establish some kind of baseline information as we, as a body, go into our retreat, so we can go further on exploring anti-displacement programs that the city is looking to operationalize. So I'm sure we'll have more questions after we have a chance to really go into retreat on those issues.
Adjacent question for Mr. Collins, since he offered it up. What's the timeline on the technical amendment to the comp plan?
I want to give you a really accurate answer, but I can't right now. We are working on the timelines. A lot of things are tied to funding sources that are grant related, and we are still working through the applications and the process on. But I hope to have an update for this group in the near future with some more definite timelines, because we're getting there. But we will see some movement within this fiscal year and an ongoing project, I can tell you that much, but as long as we have funding, yeah.
Super cool. Yeah, I just wanted to keep, I know there had been previous discussion about a potential amendment to include the land acknowledgement, because currently we have, you know, Mr. Dwayne Barton had provided us kind of a cultural reflection on what our city is, and just we're going to complement that with the land acknowledgement as well. So if that could be, you know, kind of thought of or included potentially by staff, that would be really appreciated.
Thank you for that reminder. I think, did we make a formalized recommendation on that?
Yeah,
We did.
I believe so.
So if it can be attached and kind of rolled in, that would be wonderful. Great. Well, we'll move into our first public hearing on the agenda. First up, we have a ministerial public hearing, which is a request for a Level 2 site plan review of a new 9-story condominium building with 47 units located at 161 Church Street. The project's PIN is identified on the agenda, and the property owner is TMCR Real Estate or Real Property Investments LLC. The applicant's contact is Ms. Kristen Kuntz. Planner coordinating review is Will Palmquist. Mr. Palmquist.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Will Palmquist with Planning and Urban Design. I'll be presenting this Level 2 site plan review for the Churchill Condominiums project located at 161 Church Street. Just as a refresher, this is a Level 2 site plan review, so this is not a conditional zoning or legislative hearing. This is a confirmation of the project's adherence to codes and standards in our UDO specifically. So the content of the presentation will be mostly tailored to that. So some quick facts here. The site is a CBD zoning district. It's about 0.4 acres. Currently a surface parking lot, and what's being proposed is a 9-story building with 47 residential units. Here you can see a little closer in view of the site, located on Church Street, which is a one-way street going south through downtown in the South Slope area. As you can kind of see on the property lines, we'll talk a little bit about this in a second, the property has two, I believe they're unopened right-of-way type alleys to the north and the south. So as mentioned, the existing zoning is a central business district. No change in that is being proposed through this review. It is outside the traditional downtown core within the tallest height zone and is not along any key pedestrian street. So here's the ground floor, lowest level site plan for the project. Again, it's a 9-story building with 43 units. The first 2 levels of the structure are structured parking, totaling 51 spaces. They are accessed off of these alleys. They are separate and not connected. The southern alley will access the lower surface parking, structured parking, and the northern alley is a little bit higher in grade, and that'll access the upper level of surface parking, structured parking. Total, yeah. Okay. I get real close. The total gross floor area for the project is approximately 95,000 square feet, so it is a level 2 review as opposed to a level 3, which kicks in at 100,000 square feet for projects without affordable housing included. There are the 5 street trees you can see proposed in grates along Church Street as is required, as well as 6 bicycle parking spaces. And at the front of the structure, there's also a new 10-foot wide minimum sidewalk proposed along Church Street as well. Here's the main front elevation of the structure, the east elevation fronting on Church Street. You can see the brown color is the 2 levels of structured parking, and then the residential above. The main pedestrian entrance is furthest north on the structure. The project complies with the design requirements of the CBD zoning district. Those include elements such as a 10-foot deep step back at a specific height along the building facade for 2/3 of the length of that facade. You can see that shown here where this patio is suggested in the elevation, as well as the smaller floor area for any floors above 75 feet in height, which happens in this section of the structure here. This is the rear facade. There's a lot of woods behind this structure currently in the whole site. Then here are the side facades. So the southern elevation, you can see the access to the lower parking deck, and then the north elevation shows the access to the upper parking area. So staff does find that all technical standards have been or are able to be satisfied and recommends approval of this level 2 site plan, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have. Or, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Required reviews. So this project was reviewed at the Technical Review Committee on May 5th. They recommended approval with conditions. It was approved as well with conditions at the June 18th Design Review Committee meeting. It is before you this evening for the level 2 review, and the project will go back to TRC for a final technical review at some point following this review. Thank you. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Palmquist. One question I had, DRC reviewed this extensively a couple of times. They made a comment in their approval with conditions about providing required street trees. The TRC report said 4 were required, 5 are being provided. So it's kind of confusing to see a DRC condition about street trees when they're providing more than what's required. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there was some confusion at the DRC meeting about the requirement, and I can't remember if that requirement is 4 or 5 now off the top of my head. But what is shown on the site plans this evening is definitely satisfies the requirement for street trees. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Palmquist. One question I have, because I always kind of just raise my eyebrows when I see a project that comes in like right under the threshold. You know, like if this was a level 3, like what would that have triggered, or like what kind of additional things would have happened?
So level 3 gets triggered when a project is above 100,000 square feet as far as the CBD goes for non-affordable projects. So in that case, it would have been a conditional zoning, and it would have been before you as a legislative matter. The project is not requesting any technical modifications as currently proposed, but yeah, that is exactly true. It's also height can trigger that. So the project is about 99 feet in height, and if they're 1 foot taller, they'd be a level 3 project as well. So they are definitely, you can assume that they are trying to stay as a level 2 for expediency and certainty, as we understand. But yes, a level 3 would be a full conditional zoning process that would have to be approved by City Council ultimately before the zoning would be approved.
Yeah, and thank you for that answer. And I'm not trying to suggest there's anything fishy going on here. I just always, when I see something like right under that threshold, I'm kind of like, oh, wait a minute, like, is there a reason? But
Absolutely.
I had a similar question, just like on the staff report, it says confirm that it's under 100,000 square feet, right? So like at what point does that happen? And what if it does end up going over 100,000?
Yeah, so that was an initial comment during the TRC review. Either the number was approximate or they didn't have it in all their plan drawings. So that was definitely something that I wanted to make sure that we were 100% clear on with them so they knew the implications, because yes, if they come to final TRC or at any point in the process for their final approvals and they show over 100,000 square feet, then their zoning is no longer valid and they'd have to come through a conditional zoning. So yeah, they are definitely well aware that that is a magic number for them, and they're definitely adhering to that based on the project design.
And there is no affordable housing proposed here?
Not as far as I know.
Other questions for staff? If not, do we have the applicant here to?
Please so.
The applicant's here and would like to speak on this. Please state your name and speak directly into the mic so they can hear on
I'm
you.
Will Scott. I'm here on behalf of Withers Ravenel. We are the design civil consultant for the project. I'm also joined by Kristen Kuntz, who's the project engineer, and Andrea Gindelman, who is our designer, as well as Peter Albruz and Eric Howell, who are the architects for the project.
Anything you'd like to add to the staff report, or?
I think Will did a great job presenting it. I think it's pretty straightforward, but I wanted to show up to make sure we could answer technical questions that you may have.
Any questions of the applicant?
I live in this neighborhood and just want to say I appreciate anyone who works to develop housing in downtown. I think it's a really great land use for our city and provides a lot of positive externalities. So I appreciate your team working so hard and diligently to bring a project forward and bring housing to downtown Asheville.
Any other questions, comments for the applicant?
Is there a green roof involved? I think I saw some comments about a green roof.
That is Peter.
I'm seeing some nods, but could somebody from the design team come up and?
Howell, I'm project manager for Progressive Companies. Yes, there is a green roof. We've got proposals for it and have a verbal approval from the owner to do a green roof.
That is awesome.
It is my belief that every building we do in the city of Asheville should have a green roof. We'll push it until as far as I can go.
I'm stoked about that.
We love to hear it. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
I mean, thank you.
Thank you. This being a public hearing, if there are no other questions for the applicant, we will open for public comment at 5:56. You may sit down. If any members of the public would like to speak on this item, please approach the mic and introduce yourself.
Or was there anyone on the list, Mr. Palmquist? Wasn't there a sign-up list or something?
Doesn't appear so. I'm looking at the sign-up list, and they're all for, oh, actually, it's just members of the applicant team. Nobody has signed up for public comment that I can see.
Correct, yep.
Seeing none approach the mic, we will close public comment on this matter at 5:56. Any further deliberation, or is anybody prepared to make a motion?
I move to recommend approval of the Church Hill Condominium Level 2 project located at 161 Church Street as presented based on site plans, elevations, and materials submitted, and discussion heard during this review, subject to addressing any outstanding technical and design review conditions.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you and best of luck.
Thank you.
So next up, we'll be entering a couple items that are legislative public hearings. Before we do, these are items that I believe most of you are here to speak about, so I'll just provide some framework around how the hearing process works for the legislative public hearing. We'll first, as we did during the ministerial public hearing, hear a presentation from staff, and then any supplemental information from the applicant. We'll open public comment. We have received all the written public comment and reviewed it prior to this meeting. For the verbal public comment, we have the sign-up list. I'll identify the speaker that's signed up as well as the next speaker in the queue in case they are in the overflow room and wish to join us to make their comment. We will limit public comment to 3 minutes per individual or if you're speaking on behalf of a group, 10 minutes, and the people who are ceding their time to you must identify themselves. We will try to hear from as many people as wish to speak. However, if comments become repetitive and don't add new information to help our deliberation, then we may exercise discretion to limit the public comment period. In addition, it's important to note that we are a recommending body, the Planning and Zoning Commission. Our recommendation will be carried up to City Council, who has the ultimate decision-making authority on whether to approve or deny. So this is not the last step in the road, just one step in the road. And with that, I'll introduce the legislative public hearing item, a request to amend the conditional zoning for properties located at 1617 Hendersonville Road for the purposes of amending the site plan and project conditions. The main parcel has pins identified and addresses on the agenda, and I will not read all of them. The property owner is Deerfield Episcopal Retirement Community, Inc. The applicant's contact is Mr. Chris Day. Planner coordinating review is Will Palmquist. Mr. Palmquist. You push the button.
Okay. All right, thank you. Good evening. I will be presenting this conditional zoning amendment request for a project at Deerfield Retirement Community Expansion at 1617 Hendersonville Road. So as you can see here on the aerial image, the site consists of one large property and 27 smaller parcels. They total approximately 120 acres in total. The site is the Deerfield Episcopal Retirement Community, faith-based nonprofit retirement community. It was founded in 1955, and it's had multiple expansions over the years, most recently in 2008. The existing zoning is already commercial expansion conditional zoning, which is a level 3 zoning district for these types of projects and scale. That was approved in 2021 for the purposes of a major expansion to the facility. And you'll be seeing some slides showing that approved master plan versus what's proposed now for that, for the site. So here you can see on the far left is the approved master plan for the site. So this was the plan in 2021 that was adopted by City Council. It was approximately 833,000 square feet in size. The new plan is in the center of the screen and is slightly smaller in overall square footage at 822,000 square feet in size. The kind of arrangement of the buildings and some of the additions proposed on the northernmost building that we'll talk to in a second really prompted this major amendment to the conditional zoning. So this has to go back through the whole process, get readopted by City Council to approve this change. On the right, you can see the overlay of the previous approved plan in the blue overlaid on the new proposed site plan. Overall, the major fundamentals of the project, such as access points, roadway networks, it has not changed significantly, mainly the elements and the placement of the buildings within the project site. So here you can see the different enumerated aspects of the project. The first item A in the very northern part of the site is a proposed expansion to the skilled nursing facility. There is also some additions to Hayden Hall, which is, gosh, I lost my spot on that. That's labeled wrong. That's E, actually, and that's the main building on the north as well. 3 different additions to that structure. Also proposed addition to the community center, shown here as G. A new independent living building that is 5 stories in height and approximately 191,000 square feet. There is a new outdoor center, number K, located here. Also, 12 new what's called hybrid homes along this roadway of the site plan. These consist of 16 independent living apartments each, which are each about 45,000 square feet in height, or in gross floor area. And then finally, there is a grounds maintenance building proposed, letter J, in the southeastern corner of the site. So a little more information about that particular building. The applicant has been working with the community to make some changes to the siting and design and operations of that building. So this is the latest iteration, shows a reorientation of the grounds building to be more north-south in orientation, to kind of try to tuck more into the landscape and be less visible. In addition to the required landscape buffer, which is a 30-foot wide landscape buffer around the site, the applicant is proposing enhancing the plantings of that buffer to make it denser, as well as adding an 8-foot tall privacy fence. The building has overall enhanced improvements from its original design, and they've relocated the dumpster and trash compactor further from the neighbors to the south and east, as well as enclosing those uses for sound purposes. There are also some limits on the hours of operations of this facility as expressed in the project conditions. So as far as compatibility of this proposed amendment to the surrounding zoning, the zoning is not changing, it's remaining residential expansion. You can see some of the city zoning to the east of the site and the county zoning, which is residential, to the south and west of the site. Staff finds that that is compatible with the proposed expansion and project of this amendment. The future land use designation of the site is residential neighborhood, which is described as being as residential neighborhoods that can benefit from having more housing diversity, such as accessory apartments, duplexes, other types of infill housing. So as far as compatibility with the infrastructure, this project was initially reviewed by the Technical Review Committee during its first iteration in 2021. Due to the configuration changes that were proposed that did not really impact the overall layout of the site, things like transportation and that sort of thing, and coupled with the fact that it was a more conceptual master plan type review, we did not take it back through TRC at this point. But those comments still remain that in regards to infrastructure, the existing roadway network is in place and not proposed to being changed. There were letters of commitment from the water service availability and allocation for the wastewater sewer system. Those are likely expired and would need to be reapplied for, but the initial approval of those indicates that there is adequate capacity for both those elements. And then finally, detailed stormwater review is pending approval of this conditional zoning process. In regards to the compatibility with the city's comprehensive plan, staff finds that the proposed project is consistent with the comprehensive plan in that it makes streets more walkable, comfortable and connected. I'm sorry, I got these a little bit out of order here. It encourages responsible growth by prioritizing greater densities of development overall throughout the city as appropriate. Increases and diversifies the housing supply by ensuring diverse mix of housing to accommodate a broad range of age groups, lifestyle choices, and affordability levels, and increases access and opportunities for all by realizing goals for an age-friendly community. Staff recommends approval of the conditional zoning amendment based on the compliance of those 4 main elements. So as mentioned, the initial design was reviewed by the TRC back in 2021. It is before you this evening for the amendment to the master plan. It has a tentative city council hearing date of August 26, and then would have to return to the TRC for final technical review sometime in the future before any final approval was given. That concludes my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have. Drop the mic.
Mic drop. Thank you, Mr. Palmquist. One clarification, I think you said in your presentation, in terms of compatibility of land use, I think you said residential expansion. This is a commercial expansion.
That is correct, yes. Commercial expansion is the zoning district, yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. To that end, I'd like to understand a little bit more of the history of the approved uses for the site. We've obviously received, a lot of public comment from concerned neighbors around compatibility. Can you speak to the uses that were approved over time, and what we're doing today does it have any change in the approved uses for the property, or is that not really material to the proposed amendment?
I think it's certainly material. I do not believe the uses are changing from what was initially approved back in 2021. The applicant might be able to speak to that in a little more detail. I do have some information about those proposed uses. There is a limited amount of kind of commercial, institutional type uses proposed as part of this project. Not finding that now. But that is kind of the reason that it was initially rezoned to commercial expansion and not residential, is that it's not purely a pure residential multifamily type use. Therefore, the commercial expansion district does allow for limited type uses like offices or limited retail or cafeterias, that kind of thing. Uses that are ancillary and accessory to those residential uses, but are definitely a little bit more commercial than a typical like multifamily type development would be.
So specific to a grounds building, maintenance building, with the array of uses there, is that treated as incidental to residential use regardless of size and operational complexity, or is there any bearing in our land use regulation around what can happen there? I know that what has been proposed are a series of operational commitments and restrictions, but specifically to the actual use, is there anything within our zoning ordinance that scales with the scale of the property?
That's a great question. I think staff would view that as accessory to the main use of the retirement community. We don't really have a use enumerated in our table of uses for that grounds maintenance building that is not like a commercial landscaping business that's going out and servicing different properties all over the area and that sort of thing. So it doesn't fall to really that kind of definition. So I would consider it more accessory to that larger retirement community mix and other mix of uses therein.
Thank you. Another question regarding buffering. This property has adjacency to property not in the city, and so not under city zoning designation. How does the city treat buffering with adjacent properties not given as city zoning designation?
So in those cases, we consider the county's zoning and make the most appropriate translation to city zoning districts. So in this case, since it's a single family, I think it's R1 or R2 as the county enumerates it, we consider that to be a single family district as far as our buffering requirements go, and we apply those same buffering requirements as if it was an RS2, RS4 type thing. And same with like an RM. If it was a multifamily district that the county had zoned nearby, then we would use the RM categories that the city uses.
So is the buffer that's being, provided the largest buffer, or most robust buffer that the city requires with residential adjacency, or?
Yes, we have two buffers, type A and type B. Type A is 20 feet wide, and that's typically when commercial uses are adjacent to multifamily residential districts. And we have the type B, which is a 30-foot wide buffer, and that's usually required when it's a commercial district next to a single-family zoning district. So out of those two, this is the type B, the 30-foot wide buffer, which is our bigger of the two landscape buffers.
Thank you. Last question on my end, then I'd love to hear questions from my colleagues. Can you speak to the provision in our UDO that prohibits gated communities? It was a little bit difficult to access both the Deerfield and the Ramble, given that both have gates preventing access to the general public. Is there any there's no bearing on the Ramble, given that that's not city, but the gated nature of the Deerfield campus, is that allowed under our current zoning standards?
That is a great question. I have not thought a lot about that. I have two potential answers. One is that this would maybe not be considered a gated community because it is a more commercial use. And then my other thought is it may be a non-conforming feature of or use of the site, since it goes back, 70 years now, that it was existing prior to when gated communities were explicitly disallowed in the table of uses, which is probably the case. Whereas today, if they were proposing a new retirement community or residential community that had a gate like that, it would not be allowed by the zoning.
Are they not required to come into conformance? I mean,
they're required to bring the site into zoning compliance as far as section 711, which is like landscaping, buffering, parking requirements, and that sort of thing. That has specific triggers. But the only, when it comes to a non-conforming use within a site, they would only lose that non-conforming right if the use was disallowed, or went away for at least 2 years is typically how it works. So that's the use versus the zoning design requirements. So the site will come up into full design requirements for landscaping and parking requirements and that sort of thing. But if they have a non-conforming use on the site, that can remain as long as it's not. As long as it doesn't disappear for a couple of years, and then they try to bring it back, basically.
So given that the project is not going back through TRC, did the prior TRC review weigh in on emergency vehicle access and all the other standards?
We encourage the applicant team to talk to individual reviewers and departments as needed on an ad hoc basis to make sure there weren't any surprises down the road when they were doing their design. They might be able to speak to how those conversations went. But yeah, we did not bring this new layout or design to the TRC specifically, feeling that because it's a conceptual master plan type review, some elements of it maybe didn't have a lot of information to review for some departments like stormwater at this time, and also things like transportation wasn't really changing. The access points were remaining the same, intersections were remaining the same, roadway configurations were remaining the same. So for those reasons, we didn't feel it necessary to come to the initial TRC review, and the project will have to go back to TRC review as in phases, perhaps as needed and proposed for final technical approval if they get approved for this amendment to the master plan.
Thank you. Other questions for staff?
yeah, so it's about process. So typically we see TRC report prior, right? You mentioned this not going back through TRC because there's not, for example, updated detail on stormwater. We noticed the previous plan has like a naturalized stormwater feature. The updated plan, I have no idea, based on the information presented, what the stormwater looks like. Is this common that, like, we're asked to approve a plan prior to TRC review?
It's not common, but I think it has happened in the past. So I think the stormwater is a little bit maybe of a different animal because there are no conceptual stormwater plans yet, and that has changed from the last review to this one. We have had a couple of these kind of conceptual master plans come through Planning and Zoning Commission, and we did route them through TRC initially in most cases, and stormwater on those elements were either very, very conceptual or not included necessarily. I'm thinking of like Ferry Road or Project Aspire, where there really weren't any stormwater plans. TRC did review, transportation networks and fire safety, some preliminary building code items regarding like high-rise development and that sort of thing. But typically for these conceptual master plan type level reviews, stormwater plans are usually very preliminary or not really included during the TRC stage. So I think that's not unusual, but it is a valid observation that the characteristic of the stormwater system has changed from the previous review to this one.
I will note that the characteristics has changed, and, any future stormwater could meet technical requirements, right?
Correct.
But the nature of the stormwater feature does have implications on site layout, and character of the site. And I will note that in the previous conditional zoning approval back in 2021, it was noted in the PZC report that the stormwater, the naturalized quote-unquote stormwater system, was one of the reasons that it was in compliance with the comprehensive plan. And so I just find it interesting that that is being removed from this plan, and so I posit that one of the two notes from the original report as being compliant with the comprehensive plan is being removed. So could this be becoming less compatible with the comprehensive plan?
That would be for your determination, for sure. So that's something to consider is, the consistency with the comprehensive plan. Maybe there are aspects that make it more consistent, but maybe not for that reason. That is definitely within your purview to decide, this project on its merits independently from the last review, and considering it against the comprehensive plan as currently proposed. But that is certainly within your purview to evaluate as the powers dictate to the commission.
Other questions for staff? Seeing none,
Well, I had a question just around, you mentioned a couple of times that the road infrastructure hasn't substantially changed. And I don't have like a takeoff quantity in front of me, but it appears to me that the roads have changed substantially, and I don't know, did staff do a takeoff of surface area of asphalt of the original approved master plan versus this or other impervious surfaces?
We have not calculated that change in impervious. The applicant might have some of those figures available perhaps. So yeah, it's definitely accurate to say that the internal roadway network has changed. The external access points remain the same. I think that's more what staff felt comfortable with not taking it through TRC, is the fact that the major access points from Hendersonville Road remain. The external roads are in place already, and it's really the internal roadway design that's changing. But we have not calculated the impervious change or roadway area or miles or anything like that difference for these two plans.
Do we have clarity on the construction access point into the site?
Do you believe the applicant was working with the community on some of that information? If we could defer that question to them, they might be able to answer that. Yes.
I had just another note here around the buffer and screening. But within the UDO, we have a specific paragraph addressing screening of dumpsters, loading docks, outdoor storage areas, and utility structures, which I think the maintenance building would count probably. It sounds like the way you're interpreting the plan that this is a utility building or utility structure as part of the overall operations. And so within that, it calls out a more robust buffering requirement and screening requirement. And I hadn't heard that that was part of the proposed buffering plan. Could you speak to that at all?
So I don't believe we've been interpreting the grounds maintenance building as a utility structure. That might mean something else. I'd have to look into that a little bit more, look at the definitions more clearly. It is true that things like dumpsters require screening or gates and that sort of thing. As far as the grounds maintenance building goes, the structure itself, I don't think would fall into that category and not require like specific screening all around it. But the applicant has proposed more screening on that buffer as it faces the neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks specifically to mechanical equipment, loading docks, storage areas, which I believe, the site plan calls out for multiple storage areas, outdoor tank storage. I'm not, I'll be glad to dig into the definitions while we continue the review, but yeah, it's hard to imagine that with 800,000 square feet, 3,500 square foot building isn't considered utility to 800,000 square feet.
Definitely think those other elements you cited, if those end up, I know there are some preliminary designs and layout of some of those elements with the grounds maintenance building, and when it comes to the final review, those will be things that definitely get reviewed against the UDO for full compliance. So if they had things of that nature in that area of the site or anywhere in the site, they would have to be screened based on those requirements. I don't think the grounds maintenance building, as we have reviewed it, would be in and of itself a utility structure that required like screening all around it. We definitely could look into that a little bit more and get some more clarity on that for sure.
Mr. Palmquist, two kind of questions is, there is a blue line stream, right, between the building, utility building, whatever we're calling it, and the other housing structures? Like there's a stream buffer we're contending with.
Is there a stream buffer as you're asking?
Correct.
I do not know.
There is one
specifically.
identified in the, whatever this document is, the supplemental grounds document that CDC put together.
I just wanted to, that was the way I was interpreting it. I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's going to play into a conversation later about why that building is located where it is, because there is a significant buffer through that part that everyone's contending with, just for my other commissioners to be aware of. The second kind of question I had was, I did not have a chance to look this up, but is there any kind of like lighting or street lighting requirements or ordinances in the city? Because my understanding from one of the supplemental documents is we got street lights going in now with that parking on the accessing there, and I can't quite remember what our guidelines are on that.
Yeah, there are lighting requirements for fixtures in the city. couple different elements of that. One is the type of fixture, and that it has to be downward directed light for dark sky compliance measures. And then also that there's no spillover basically into adjacent properties. And I believe in that supplemental grounds maintenance building submission, there is a photometric plan showing that based on the location of those lights and the type of fixture and such, that there would not be any spillover effect onto the outside of the property, which is what the UDO requires and would be required for the entirety of the site.
Thank you, Mr. Palmquist.
Follow-up question on the lighting. When applying the city's lighting standards, we're looking at permanent fixtures. Is there any consideration of vehicular traffic and light spillover from that?
There's really not for vehicular traffic. So yeah, kind of the accessory lighting, temporary lighting, those kinds of things are not specifically accounted for. I think that does speak to things like the buffering requirements and that sort of thing that try to mitigate some of those effects that are not, specific to the lighting requirements and so forth.
And this might be more of a question for the applicant, but in the photometric analysis or acceptance by the city, is topography taken into account, or is it treated as a flat site, knowing that there is some topographic change between the adjacent properties in this one?
I believe it's taken into some account. I don't know if it's a very detailed type analysis. Having not prepared one, I can't say for certain, but I believe it's considered, but I don't think it might not be a super technical type analysis in that regard, though. Question.
Thanks. Any other questions for staff before we, Ms. Ashley? Did you?
Well, I did look up definitions. We don't have a definition for utility structure, but we have a definition for utility service area and utility substation, which kind of indicates what you would think of for utility structure. Utility service area containing surface-mounted utility equipment, which is not screened from the street by a building, is less than 100 feet from street right-of-way. This is equipment belonging to public and private utilities. And then utility substation, structure or facility for transforming or transmitting a service provided by a utility company. So both those definitions, and there's a utility pole too, but those both seem to be what you would normally think of as a primary utility use, not utilized for other things, but utilities and equipment. That's
Excellent.
what it appears to be.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for staff, or should we invite the applicant to?
I got one quick one. Last question, Mr. Palmquist. The 3,500 square feet calculation for the utility structure in question, does that include the pole barn and equipment storage area, the under roof, or is that just the four-walled structure? I just want to make sure we're all talking the same calculation here before we really dive into this.
I believe it is just the walled-in structure,
Okay.
based on how we measure floor area for
Maybe the
buildings.
applicant can answer more directly.
They'd be able to clarify for sure, but that is my understanding of that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Palmquist.
All right, do we have a representative from the applicant team that wishes to add any information?
I'm not from the applicant team. My name is Derek Allen, and I've been talking with Mr. Ost this afternoon about terms that we are trying to resolve with a lot of the neighbor concerns, and clearly some of the concerns that these commission members have and have asked so far. This past Friday, we got a proposal from the applicant team that was pretty close to addressing a lot of the concerns that my clients have, which are the hazes. And it was enough, we were able to send back some proposed conditions. There's about 12 to 15 conditions, depending on how you group them. And we've been working on those for the last 2 days with Mr. Ost directly. We're very close to having those finished. We would like to have some more time. We have suggested for that reason and also for the reason that we have a pending appeal that's going to the Board of Adjustment, that we would have it continued to the September 3rd Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Mr. Ost and the applicant team has.
Could we hear that request from the applicant?
Sure, and
With respect to
he
your
asked that
relationship?
I make that motion and they consent to it, so that's what I was setting up, yes. And one of the things, just teasing this out a little bit, and then I'll turn it back over to Mr. Ost, is the grounds maintenance facility is going to be off-site now. The outside storage will be off-site. The other pieces that were kind of jammed down into that area are going to be relocated. There's going to be specific lighting restrictions in that area. There's going to be specific parking restrictions, custom buffer restrictions, and they're more detail, really, which was part of our appeal, and a lot of the questions that you guys have had so far really will be answered with those 3 pages of conditions.
Motion, and let me just add on to what he said a little bit. I'm sorry. I said I've forgotten how these microphones are
Finicky, sorry
directed. We do consent to the motion, and we have talked with the staff. We think we can stay on our same critical path for final approval and getting to the TRC afterwards. But rather than trying, you all have been through this before, we've had a lot of significant changes. Rather than try and negotiate the wording of those conditions on the floor of this meeting, we thought it would be better to come to you all with having conditions that we agreed upon. Having said that, we've been working awfully hard on this, and we're ready to proceed tonight. But we think that it would be a better use of everybody's time if we took a breath and came back to you all at your next meeting.
Certainly respect the dialogue and appreciate the collaboration. Hearing that you consent to a motion, I think we need to hear that the applicant is requesting a continuance for our board to deliberate on that. Is the applicant requesting a continuance of this item?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Ost. Any questions as we consider or deliberate on whether to make a motion on a request for a continuance? Any thoughts from staff?
Could you discuss what you would like to see? So they've said that there are conditions and they've discussed them, but if there's anything in particular, since you don't know what those conditions are, if there's
Right.
anything you would like to see, this is your opportunity so that they're clear when they come back, if that could be addressed.
We've heard some of the questions you all have asked, and we're prepared to respond to those, and we'll be prepared next time, too.
What do you all think? Any questions or requests? I heard questions around stormwater, which if this doesn't go back to TRC before it comes back to us, will still not be fully fleshed out. So it appears that maybe the changes are going to be around the grounds maintenance structure, which was the subject of most of the public comment that we received. But anything else material to convey to the applicant?
If you read the public comment, you know how important the grounds maintenance building was, and we think that with the relocation of that, it addresses a lot of the issues, and we hope we can get that worked out in the conditions.
I just have a question. I was curious. Is there currently a maintenance building, and is it on Salisbury? Because there's a structure on Salisbury.
On Dorset.
Right, which is off of Salisbury, right?
Correct.
Okay.
The answer is that there's a maintenance facility, but it's not where the new one was proposed to be.
And so ultimately that will be demolished?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to, yes, personally, I'd like to see just the intent of the stormwater feature. I know it was a big component of the first approval of the CZ. It appeared, at least in the report, I was not a part of the board at that time, to be compliant with the comprehensive plan. So if there could just be any indication. I see on the on the supplemental information that it kind of looks like a detention, but, that's just one piece of the larger plan, so.
We've heard you, we've been taking notes, so
Thank you. I would like to understand if there are any additional environmental impacts associated with the revised plan. I don't know if the stormwater features shown on the original concept are naturally occurring or just they were going to be created. So are we going to lose more assets is what I'm asking.
and we'll have an answer for you.
Go ahead.
Just a procedural question for staff. If there is a motion to continue, do we still open a public hearing? Is that, with the understanding that it's going to come back, is that still something we don't? Okay. Coming back. Gotcha. Commissioner Faircloth? Yeah.
That was one of my questions, Mr. Chair. My other thing was I'm glad that there's a dialogue and this is working out between some parties, because I know there was a lot of public comment that you're aware of. I do just want to express a little bit of frustration that, there's only so many spots at these meetings, and so, someone else was told they couldn't have this spot because this was on here, so I'm a little frustrated that if we're just going to continue it immediately, like, we should have done that a little earlier in the day or yesterday or something. So I understand it's a work in progress, but a lot of people showed up tonight to, be part of this, and I'm just want to voice a little bit of frustration, but I am appreciative that there is an active dialogue and something's being worked out, so thank you.
I second that. It seems like these negotiations are sometimes wait till the deadline.
If this, is this a member of the applicant team or a member of the public that wishes to speak? So we have not opened public comment. We will, please, I understand we have not opened the public hearing, so we cannot accept public comment at this time. If we are going to be entertaining public comment, you'll be recognized and called to the podium, but thank you. I understand this is just a procedural matter that we have to kind of abide by our rules of procedure. Any other questions for the applicant, considerations that we'd like to see before we discuss whether we're going to entertain a motion to continue?
When you say that the grounds facility will be relocated, can you share more about what you mean by that?
It's going to be relocated to an off-site property, and
Is it a Deerfield property, or will it be operated by Deerfield?
it's not on the Deerfield property.
Okay, so it'll be contracted out?
I'm not the best person to answer that question. I do know that the ground maintenance facility is going to be off-site, 3 to 5 miles away.
Thank you.
Well, we are where we are. Would anyone like to make a motion to continue this matter as requested by the applicant?
So moved.
A date certain of September 3rd.
So we have a motion to continue. Could I amend that motion to be to date certain September 3rd?
Amendment accepted.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion is granted. Any opposed? The motion is granted unanimously. We'll see you back on September 3rd. With apologies to everyone who wasted their time to come tonight. I share the frustration of other commissioners that these 11th hour negotiations are really frustrating. So we'll see you in a month.
Thank you.
Want to recess at all for a minute, or what are you feeling like?
Let's take a brief recess. At 6:42, we'll return at 6:50. You can can, this was submitted in advance. We've all reviewed it, but yeah, you can certainly resubmit comments to this same email address, and we get all those emails, yeah. Sorry. I appreciate you coming out, and sorry that it wasn't, yeah.
Yeah.
I apologize, you know, we're all frustrated about it. What?
They said somebody else. I was transmission substation. Because I'm like, maybe I'm missing. Buffered enough. I think it was an interesting question about the county. Will did a great job. County, city, and I guess the only thing you could have said.
You pulling out all your tricks.
I also owe you. That and because we were with this.
The new addition to it.
Yeah.
It's a lot nicer than the old part.
Or you still have to take the elevator. Something.
Yeah.
That is. Oh yeah, so oh yeah. We're having this on the 3rd. We're gonna need like.
I met at a
Derek.
previous
Yes.
meeting, but yeah.
Good to see you.
Okay, this is Sydney.
Derek, good to see you.
Hi, Jesse. I'm Carly. Nice to meet you.
Glad
Yeah, I know. Finally staffed up.
Yeah, that's
so.
good. That's awesome.
Time did he say we're coming back?
Oh, are you famous?
Your quota in the second.
That on your wall.
Unimpacting, but what about
They talked to.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Resume. Can we call the meeting back to order? We'll call the meeting back to order. Next up on our agenda is a request to conditionally rezone a portion of the property located at 587 Haywood Road from Community Business 2 Conditional Zone to Community Business 1 Conditional Zone. The property's PIN is identified on the agenda. The property owner is Trinity United Methodist of Asheville. The applicant's contact is Ms. Anna Pizzo, and the planner coordinating review is Will Palmquist. Mr. Palmquist.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening again, Commissioners. This is a conditional zoning request for a project known as Safe Shelter and Home located at 587 Haywood Road. Get into a little more of the details of the site itself. So this is a property in West Asheville, just off, the property itself is off of Haywood Road. It's about 3¼ acres. The actual site itself is limited to the rear portion of the property, which includes the kind of a community building seen here and the parking lot. The proposed use for the site has been operating under a temporary use permit through Code Purple, and that includes some of the shelter use and associated uses. And this conditional zoning would be to permanently allow for those uses on site. So the existing zoning is actually a combination of Haywood Road Corridor District and Community Business 2 Conditional Zone. The project received a conditional zoning back in 2011 to use the kind of rear community center building as an educational building. Since the applicant is proposing to use that portion of the site as a overnight shelter with some other uses, a change in that district is required. The CB2 district does not allow for shelters as a permitted use, but the CB1 district does. So this change in zoning, if approved, would allow for that shelter and other uses and the associated conditions with that operation. So here are those uses spelled out. They include a nightly shelter with a maximum of 35 beds, as well as other uses pertaining to serving the community, such as a community center, barbershop, consignment shop, preschool, K-9 learning community, community gathering and training space with a focus on workforce development. There is no proposed development or site improvements at the site. It would all be existing with that building and other site features as it exists today. So in terms of the compatibility with surrounding zoning districts, staff finds that the proposed CB1 district is compatible with the surrounding zoning districts, Haywood Road corridor along Haywood Road, and then the residential multifamily RM8 district in the kind of remainder of the residential neighborhood to the north. The future land use of the property is traditional corridor. That speaks to corridors that can be enhanced over time with multimodal access, broad range of community service uses, parking located to the sides and rear, and higher residential densities supported by transit and sidewalks. Infrastructure review is non-applicable for this review since there is no proposed development or buildings associated with this conditional zoning. And then as far as the comprehensive plan consistency goes, staff finds that the proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan in regards to the goal to alleviate homelessness by supporting organizations with the mission of combating homelessness to the greatest extent possible and strategically locating services for the homeless so that they are accessible and equitably distributed throughout the city and region, as well as promote social equity and paths towards upward economic mobility by encouraging partners to promote job placement and workforce development services in disadvantaged communities, and providing career path mentoring across all skill and education levels, especially for those living in poverty. Staff recommends approval of this conditional zoning request based on the compliance of those elements. Project is before you this evening for a recommendation that would be brought to City Council at a tentative hearing date of August 26. The project would not necessarily have to go through, or would not have to go through technical review committee, but would have to go through building and zoning final compliance review and meet any other zoning requirements and building code requirements that are associated with the proposed uses. And that concludes my presentation. I'm glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Palmquist. Any questions for staff?
So how does it work to partially rezone a property? Because it's all one pin, right?
Is all one pin? Yes, so the property has two different zoning districts today, and it would continue to do so going forward. So essentially, some elements of the zoning would include the entire property, things like landscaping and that kind of thing that apply generally to all districts. And then the two different zoning districts would consider the uses allowed on those different sections of the property, and then things like setbacks and heights and that kind of thing that are specifically called out in those sections. So the Haywood Road Form District is a very specific form code district, so those would have, if like the church wanted to redevelop into a different building, they would have to follow those form code requirements as explicitly stated in that section, whereas and that would be a general use district, so the front of the property that the church is on would be generally Haywood Road and would not have a conditional zoning associated with it. It could be anything that the Haywood Road Corridor District allows for, whereas the rear portion of the property would be explicitly bounded by the conditions of the conditional zoning that's before you this evening.
So along with that, is that physically delineated within the property? Like, is there a note on the title or the deed that, 200 feet north of monument, blah, blah, blah? That's usually how it's kind of, so how's that maintained?
Yeah, it's not as precise, so it doesn't follow meets and bounds. It's not a survey level type delineation. As you can see, the former zoning line was actually kind of too far north based on the aerial imagery of the difference between the church use and this community center use, so that's kind of getting cleaned up a little bit. It is a little more, it's not as specific, and there's a little more discretion at the administration of the zoning in that regard, where that line falls. But it is not a survey level detail.
The conditional zonings are recorded and they run with the property, so anybody would look at this map, and I think you're close enough on there to say, okay, that's the section that is encumbered by this conditional zoning.
Could you walk us through the neighborhood engagement that you did during the conditional rezoning process?
The applicant has performed some of that. We can probably let them speak best to that. The city has not performed any neighborhood engagement outside of the notification requirements for this public hearing.
Can you remind us the radius, the notification radius?
So for Planning and Zoning Commission hearings, we send out mailings to property owners within 200 feet of the geometry, shape of the property, and also post signs at the the major street frontages of the property, and also the legal ad as well in the Citizen Times newspaper.
Any other questions for staff? Do we have a representative of the applicant here that wishes to provide any supplemental information?
Hey, how are y'all doing? I'm Christian Chambers. I'm the director of the Safe Shelter and Home. Yeah, and I just want to say, I mean, it was pretty comprehensive there. We have reached out to the neighbors. It's been a months-long process. We go all up and down the street. So we do a community cleanup every Tuesday, which engages all the neighbors. We get requests in, like we got a Burton Street neighborhood association. I spoke with the head of that this morning, and they were in full support. And we really have let everybody know that our doors are open to whatever feedback, whatever time of day, whenever. We're there all the time. But we've held 2 community meetings so far. One was a little smaller with direct neighbors, and one was basically the entirety of Haywood Road at Trinity United Methodist in the sanctuary. And we're having another on Thursday. We've been very engaged.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions? I would say I appreciate the commitment to make this sort of a permanent setup instead of under an emergency allowance. I think that shows commitment to provide this much-needed service to the community. So thanks for what you're doing. Other questions, deliberation from commission members?
I have one more question for staff, if I can.
Sure.
It looks like this parcel is included in the Appendix 7F, newly created inside our UDO, and I might have missed the information or overlooked it, but I believe this appendix was created at the council level. And so I'm wondering what the applicability of Appendix 7F listed as other parcels reference map might be for our review purposes.
Sure. So the Appendix 7F is basically delineates properties that are governed by the old, so to speak, flag lot subdivision regulations, whereas the updated flag lot subdivision regulations apply to the remainder of the city. Those are generally a more liberal type of requirement and allow for more lots to be created with smaller widths of the lot size. And this property being an Appendix 7F would have to comply with the older, probably more stringent flag lot requirements. So in that case, since this is not proposing a subdivision or anything of that nature, it would not really apply to the consideration for this conditional zoning or the use of the property going forward.
And cottage courts,
Yes,
right?
thank you. And cottage court developments, which we loosened up those rules a little bit for non-Appendix 7F properties. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification and question. So the applicability is really limited to those 2 application types, flag lot development and cottage court, and has not been added more generally to any zoning application. Any other questions before we open for public comment? Seeing none, we will open for public comment at 7:08. If you'd like to speak on this matter, please approach the mic and introduce yourself. Seeing none, we will close public comment at 7:08. Any other further deliberations? Not, I would entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion. I move to recommend approval of the conditional zoning request for the property located at 587 Haywood Road from Haywood Road Form District Corridor HR3 and Community Business 2 Conditional Zone CBII-CZ to Haywood Road Form District Corridor H3 and Community Business 1 Conditional Zone CBI-CZ, and find that the request is reasonable, is in the public interest, is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meets the development needs of the community. One, supports organizations with the mission of combating homelessness to the greatest extent possible, and strategically locates services for the homeless so that they are accessible and equitably distributed throughout the city and region. And two, encourages partners to promote job placement and workforce development services in disadvantaged communities, and providing career path mentoring across all skill and education levels, especially for those living in poverty.
A second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And last but not least, we have a zoning text amendment, a request to consider a proposed zoning text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 7 of the Asheville Code of Ordinances, to amend Section 733B, 761C, 7520, and 714.1 relating to Board of Adjustment membership and legal ad notification requirements and non-conforming accessory dwelling unit structures. Planner coordinating review is Sam Starbaum. Mr. Starbaum.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. It is good to be before you. I have not one, not two, but 5 zoning text amendments for you this evening under one omnibus ordinance, and there is a specific and targeted reason for that. All of these zoning text amendments are minor, and they are process related in making the BOA operate more efficiently and to save staff time so staff can work on other components. These do not in any way, shape, or form change the lot geometry or any building requirements for the built environment. This is about existing building inventory in the city of Asheville only. And I will go ahead and move forward. For those of you that have seen my presentations before, I like to put the end at the beginning. Staff is going to recommend approval of this for a number of reasons. I will get into comprehensive plan compliance, but there are other factors at play here that make this omnibus ordinance, these 5 zoning text amendments, a little unique in that we are also taking this forward with clerk support, and clerks had urged this. The Buncombe County had urged this because we need to get closer compliance with session law from the North Carolina general statutes, with Buncombe County processes, and then also there are 2 other factors that come into play for evaluation of these zoning text amendments this batch is that you have the FAST team feedback, and then also the accepted missing middle housing study recommendations play directly to these things. So I will get into this, and of the 5 zoning text amendments, I'm going to start with the 4 that specifically and directly address the Board of Adjustment. So even though I made this presentation, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. 761 and 762 are the easiest of the 5 zoning text amendments. This is about where you submit your Board of Adjustment application. For some reason, we have it in our UDO in these sections that it goes to the city clerk. This is particularly frustrating for both applicants and the Board of Adjustment liaison, yours truly, because what happens is they're usually down at 161 working with PAC, they're working with planners, they're speaking with us, and this means that I have to take an hour to run down there, get the application, run back up, take this a number of places, or it's clunky and inefficient at best. So what we are proposing is changing the language in 761 and 762, which are for variances and appeals, to say that that goes directly through our online permitting system, or it goes to Planning Director Steph Monson-Dahl, or her designee, the BOA liaison. So that's all that is, easy peasy. That's 761 and 762. The third one, 7520, is about noticing for quasi-judicial hearings. The Board of Adjustment is quasi-judicial, which means that we don't accept public comment in a normal way. What we are proposing is not to take away all noticing. What we are removing is the requirement from statutory notice, which no longer applies here, that we will not post in the Asheville Citizen Times. This is the only statutory noticing we are removing. We will still have the flyers, we will still have the signs, all other processes of noticing will be followed. We're just taking out the notice in the paper, again, and that is to better align with session law as advised by the clerks and by the North Carolina General Assembly. This is particularly important, and of note here is that we spend right now between $3,300 and $5,700 annually on these notices. So that is another monetary inefficiency, where at a time municipal budgets can use every dime we can get. I've been in this business 10 years and it's never gotten cheaper. So the numbers I have just quoted you are in 2025 dollars. I am sure that will increase in future dollars as you move further down the line. So that is what 7520 is just taking out the statutory noticing, which no longer applies, from the paper. And then that brings us to the fourth of the BOA specific and direct ones. And forgive me, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how close to get to this mic, and it is uncomfortable. These are really sensitive. But 733 is about the composition, and much like 7520, this is not coming from the comprehensive plan. This is coming from the clerks, who tell us how we can be in better compliance with session law, and in particular session law 2013-30, which talks about the board composition. So what we are proposing is going down to 3 alternates, down from 7, 2 COA alternates, which is down 3 from 5, and then going to 1 member and 1 alternate who reside within 1 mile of the municipal limits. Those 2 are appointed by Buncombe County, and currently there are just 2 members appointed by Buncombe County. So what we have in our UDO does not even align with what Buncombe County has. So this is simply about changing the board process to better align, again, with general statutes and what Buncombe County has. This is a ministerial process issue-based zoning text amendment, and is something that has been in the works for quite a while. I want to be perfectly clear too, all existing members that have board seats will remain in their seats and will term out, so this will not affect the current composition of that board. So those are the 4 Board of Adjustment zoning text amendments. This brings us to the other one, and again, I have said this before, I will say this again, and I will probably say it a 3rd time as well. What we are proposing is about BOA processes only. So while this pertains to ADUs, this is really about Board of Adjustment processes. You can see here on this slide, this is one of the 714-1 variances that was approved by the Board of Adjustment. It is at 73 Swananoa Avenue. It's 450 square feet, which is exactly the median size of all of our 714-1 variances. And it is 2.5 feet off the rear and 1.5 feet off the side property line. So this means just because it isn't 6 feet off the rear and 6 feet off the side, even though it was an existing accessory structure that the city recognized, it had to go before the Board of Adjustment. This is, of course, not the only one. This has been a burden that has been coming back and back and back to the Board of Adjustments. When you have a hardship, you get a variance. When you get a variance 16 times out of the last 38 variances, you have an inefficient regulation. And that's what this is. Again, we're not changing anything about what is allowed, what is changed. This is about existing inventory. So we will allow already existing accessory structures, which are, perhaps closer than the required 6 feet off the rear and 6 feet off the side, to be occupied as accessory dwelling units without having to go to the Board of Adjustment. So this is where we will get in the comprehensive plan review. There are a number of things here where all 5 of the zoning text amendments hit the mark in the comprehensive plan. And again, we're also talking about the general statutes. We're talking about Buncombe County processes. We're talking about city clerk processes. And we're also talking about the missing middle housing recommendations, which I'll get to in a second. But specific to our Living Asheville comprehensive plan, we find that this does encourage responsible growth. It improves regional collaboration because we're coming into line with Buncombe County. It does help the community involvement in decision-making. It makes the process much clearer. I have heard repeatedly people confused about how just to drop off a variance, and that's frustrating, but it's also a time cost. I think that that's something that planning can do a better job of, is acknowledging the time cost of both staff and our residents. And that's something that happens when submitting a variance and going through the process of a variance. And then, of course, as I had mentioned earlier, we are meeting the goal of fiscal sustainability. It saves us between $33 and $5,700 annually, $25. I think that number goes up as we go further, again, because I have never, ever seen advertising get cheaper. So that's the comprehensive plan review. I did also want to talk for a second, just particular to the ADU zoning text amendment, about the compliance with our newly accepted missing middle housing study, which is about reducing those soft costs. It says as a development tool that, it's not enough to peak development, that you have to reduce soft costs. And this is a process that takes 6 weeks. It costs over $500. You have to do noticing, you have to take the time. Oftentimes people engage in attorneys or some other representation for this, for already existing structures that we recognize as accessory structures. So by reducing this and not requiring applicants to come to the Board of Adjustment, we're saving them money and meeting the goals of the missing middle housing study. I want to be clear too that this does not change anything if the ADU zoning text amendment were not passed. Nothing would really change. They would still have to go back to the Board of Adjustment, but that is something that would be granted automatically because the building stock would be older than the UDO and would therefore be a hardship. This is something where we have granted all of those. And that's what brings me to the data that we have on this, which causes us to bring this before you. All of what we do is data informed, or at least I hope it is. Certainly the presentations I do are. So these are the 16 of those 38 variance cases we've seen since 2023. Only one of them is in a legacy neighborhood. Again, the median size of these requests is 450 square feet. The average is 533 square feet. Only 2 have gone above that 800 square foot. That is, that's 173 Macon and 32 Dalton Street. Those are also different. I hesitated to include these, but I did, so I have to be fair and include this here as well. Those were different. 32 Dalton Street was relating to a longstanding building permit issue from 2003, and that's a larger lot where there were 2 buildings. While clearly subordinate, it was still just larger than the main home. And 173 Macon was also a zoning compliance and an NOV issue too. So those are the only 2 that are over 800 square feet. But what we're finding is that the people that request this are just trying to get homes and create infill, to create the missing middle we strive for. And it is in compliance largely with our ordinance. It just is closer to the property lines than 6 feet off the rear, 6 feet off the side. It would not be a presentation of mine if there wasn't a map. So here is, of course, the spatial distribution of all of these requests. You can see 297 Clayton, that is the only one in Emma. The one furthest left kind of looks like it's in Emma. It is actually across the street. That is 167 Country Home Road. But I think the data here tells a story. All data tells a story. And the story here is that there is no particular neighborhood that is either disadvantaged or burdened by or given an unfair advantage or benefits from this kind of policy. So we're finding that all the ADU requests are all over the city, and it is, again, a ministerial process request to make sure that these existing accessory structures can just be converted to ADUs. So that brings us to where we are today. It seems like a lifetime ago, but this has been heard in 2024. So this originally went through the clerks with Maggie. This included the ADU and the BOA zoning text amendments. That was heard by the Board of Adjustment on February 26, 2024. We took a pause for Hawk Creek, and we were going to do it sometime in the fall. Then Helene happened on May 20th. We did go to Planning and Zoning Commission. You had heard this ADU zoning text amendment. You heard that on May 20th, and then that brings us to today. We're targeting August 26th for City Council. That is tentative, as we know from previous agenda items this evening. All dates are tentative when it comes to what we do. And that brings us to our recommended motion. Again, I'd like to stress that these are ministerial. They're minor in nature, and they're all related to BOA processes, which is particularly why we are recommending approval, just to make sure we are in conformance with not just the comp plan, but the general statutes and our friends at Buncombe County. So that's a lot of information now to me, but I would be happy to stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Starbaum. Appreciate the information and presentation, particularly around where we have seen variances in the last couple of years. Did you take a look further back than 2023, or is there a way to capture kind of a broader time horizon for these types of variances?
There is a way to do it. It is more time intensive. It was easiest to do it on a rolling 24-month period, so that's why it goes all the way back to the beginning of 2023.
Understood. Any other questions from Commission about this?
Thank you for your presentation, always thorough, and also a little bit visually more stimulating than others we've seen. I had kind of a question about the Board of Adjustments itself. The quasi-judicial nature of these variances are generally focused around hardships. Is
Correct.
that correct?
Yes.
So would a hardship be defined as buying a property with an existing structure under an existing regulation within the UDO? Does that define a hardship?
There are 4 statutory standards that have to be met by a hardship. It is not my place to say what a hardship is. It is up to the Board of Adjustment to evaluate the application, and in our application, they have to address those 4 statutory standards. Typically, I will say broadly, if buildings were built before a regulation, it is seen as a hardship, but it is ultimately up to the Board of Adjustment to make that call.
Yeah, built before, but maybe not purchased before. So in other words, if I purchase a non-conforming building and then the regulation changes to become more liberal or more providing more opportunity for uses, that may enhance the value of the property.
I would leave that to legal about the influence of finance on a hardship. There is some gray area there. Janice, do you have any input on the difference between purchasing a property even though the age of the buildings is older than the regulation?
The board couldn't consider or, you know, so they will consider things like topography or something that's existing. So you're right, a building is already existing, and you might say, well, somebody bought it, knowing that it couldn't be used for ADU. But the real balancer in the standards is the last one, which is this consistent with the spirit of the comprehensive there are many times where we have buildings and the variance gets granted because overall it serves the purpose that we're intending to go with in the comprehensive plan. The one I can think about that's come before this board most often, and Jeffrey, you might have to help me, or Mr. Fairclough, because you did the longest, but we used to get variances all the time about one-story buildings requirement for like a sidewalk that had to be a certain width, and the building was already there, and they were like, we can't change it. And then there was also existing building and some requirement to add on some second story to it. And each time they requested, we can't do that. And this board voted to say, that we don't think that meets the spirit of the plan, of the comprehensive plan and the zoning, so the zoning got changed. Does that help at all to say that? Why, what he's saying is this tends to, I haven't seen enough of them, but I would suppose that the reasons the board gives are consistent, which is it's there, this buffer we want to have use of these, and we don't want to make the process so onerous that people
And I want to be clear again, in going back to this data, it is clearly subordinate, which is the purpose of an accessory structure. None of them are larger than the primary residence.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is an issue that I see regularly, which is asymmetric information. So for instance, a person, good intent, bad intent, whatever intent, may know information that another person doesn't. So they would approach them to buy a property and say, oh, well, that structure is of no value because it's required to be within a setback, concealing the fact that they may know that the Board of Adjustments is regularly providing variances as an ADU. That level of nuance may have allowed these 38 units to seek value above and beyond the market rate they purchased for their home. I guess what I'm getting at is that just because the Board of Adjustments is facing this question and may not like this question, that doesn't inherently mean that it's out of step with what's going on in the real world, even if there is a cost associated with it and a burden. So that's where I would say that, and also previous performance, like what you're showing us here, is no necessary prediction of future performance. In other words, say a regulation passes and it appears that for the last 2 years it hasn't been used in a nefarious way. That doesn't mean that tomorrow it doesn't become used in a nefarious way. So I would hesitate to say that any regulation is necessarily non-impactful when we are obviously making changes to a development pattern. That's just kind of my perspective there, and having observed, the Board of Adjustments on a number of occasions, I do think there's a very thin line to walk sometimes between what's considered a hardship or actually a development subsidy, because it is a subsidy when somebody leverages asymmetric information to their benefit, particularly against folks who may not have the particular knowledge or skill set within the UDO. Obviously, it's easy for any of us to get up here and get a little bit confused and turned around, and whether it's a utility building or a utility use, or if that's the way the word utility is supposed to be used. And so I am a little bit hesitant to say that this map represents what we'll see in the future, which is equitable distribution of the modifications that are being presented.
And I was wondering, so this is, you said 16 of the 38? Was there a reason for choosing the 16?
No, so that 16 were agendized between 2023 and now. So that number is what the number of variances that took place between, let's see, so yeah, the bottom number, that 38, is all the variances we heard since 2023. That would include flood variances. That would include sign variances. 16 is the number of variances specific to 714.1.
Yeah, I think the line of inquiry or analysis is interesting, and I do think that we know and understand that zoning conformance or zoning allowance is a tool used in the marketing and sale of properties. I would maybe contend that the plausibility or the undeniability of a variance that is pursued because of this is it is selective information. So wouldn't the equitable solution be to clarify within our zoning regulation what is allowed almost automatically, although it's only accessible through a variance process that seems to be kind of always granted?
That's correct. And I mean, I don't know enough about it. I think clarity is super important. I think that's by far the best way to provide equity. However, I'm not sure what data we have around existing non-conforming structures. So this is kind of like maybe a strange thing to say, but if we don't have an understanding of the inventory of non-compliant structures, then we really don't know where this is going to be most densely implemented. So is that more likely to be up Kimberly near Country Club because there's a lot of detached garages, or is it more likely to be in Emma because nobody really is so concerned if a shed is within setbacks and they've been allowed to have more variance in their building structures. I personally don't know. It's kind of more of a question or an examination, kind of a peeling back of where are non-conforming structures? Why do they exist? How did they get there? I think those are valid questions because that's the future supply we're talking about.
Yeah. If I may, Chair, if I can respond to that, excellent question, and you and I are so on the same page. I wish we had that information. The closest we come is there is a building footprint layer from the county that is, you know, the last one is 2024. That does not have any relation to the setbacks or to the property lines. Again, when that is shot through ortho imagery, that is not always accurate. I always recommend anyone that comes through the planning office to get a survey, because that's going to tell you exactly where that building is in relation to the property lines. That is just not something that's reliable. And again, there would not be a way to query specifically non-conforming. I can tell you from all the ages that the Board of Adjustment since 2023, in those 16 cases, none of those have been new buildings. They have all long predated the UDO. I'm going to say the majority are around the 1950s or when they were built. So it's one of those where it was an entirely different permitting process. So there haven't been new buildings. There is not a case of an illegal build in that instance. So it is all older development. I think the oldest was 17 Pinedale. That's one I took through. That was, the applicant was McKenna Manspeaker, and that was 1909. And that's one of those where they built it wherever they wanted to because they didn't go to a zoning office.
I really appreciate this thoughtfulness just around potential unintended consequences of these actions. I know, you know, exploring this a little further, like Commissioner Wheatley, I feel, has done here, makes it feel to me that maybe, you know, this particular one, 714.1, may not be super minor in nature. There may be larger impacts, especially since we don't have an inventory. It's kind of hard to know how this will impact development pattern. And I'm just curious, because we're doing a lot of discussion talking about legacy neighborhoods right now. Were the legacy neighborhoods confronted?
I certainly wouldn't say confronted. No, certainly not.
Sorry,
so I classify public meetings, public input, and working with communities as direct and indirect. Directly, there was not, again, because a lot of this, particularly 4 of the 5 or 80% of the zoning text amendments is just compliance with general statutes and things like this. But there is absolutely indirect public input because we're acting on plans that were accepted and approved, like the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan and the Missing Middle Housing Study, which had extensive public input in those neighborhoods. And they're telling us to make it easier to build smaller structures and do infill.
If I could, excuse me, if I could add some information for Sam. Now I'm too close to the mic. Okay. Just for the Commission's information, a very common barometer of when a text amendment is something you should investigate is when that text amendment, that text provision is no longer regulating the way you want it to. In this case, we've had 16 cases over the last 2 years. Where the board has consistently and in every time been able to make the state mandated findings to grant a variance. That generally has told us in the past that that is likely to continue, right? It's not really about making the Board of Adjustments lives easier. It is more about making regulations work better with where we need to go as a community and what our applicants are looking for. 16 out of 16 is a pretty good streak. So I'd say the chances of setback variances for existing accessory structures coming to the Board of Adjustment in the future and the same findings being made are pretty high. So that's why we brought this forward. We do feel that these will continue to receive variances and these will be converted to ADUs when people want them to be. So it really is a more sensible direction to update the regulation, and again, makes things more predictable. Now, is there a chance there's one in the next batch, just 16, that doesn't go the same way, of course. But again, 16 out of 16 is a pretty good streak.
And if I may, I actually have to clarify, it's 15 out of 16. I had referenced 173 Macon, that I had mentioned that was a notice of violation. What had happened was that was already existing as an accessory dwelling that was related to an addition that was done without any building permits, any zoning permitting. So by denying it, it got to go back to an ADU. So that one was actually technically denied. Just to be clear, that was denied at the Board of Adjustment, but their denial allowed that to operate as or continue to operate as an accessory dwelling unit. That's a totally different one, but I ethically feel weird to say because it is not, for those of you keeping track at home, data is very important to me. We got to be clear on that. So that was denied if you go back to the minutes, but that is to keep that as an accessory dwelling unit.
Thank you. And to go back to Commissioner Cycle's kind of point, it feels like, you know, all the discussion and question and concerns so far among us, and obviously we're going to open for public comment, surrounds the 714.1. Are there any questions or concerns with the other provisions, kind of more composition of Board of Adjustment and notice, receipt of permit, or, you know, I guess, and this would obviously involve consent from staff, but is there a split the review and recommendation option that could emerge?
One question about the composition of the Board of Adjustment. How many seats are we losing with this
Recommendation. So existing seats does not change. We're going to 3 alternates. What we have in parentheses is what the existing regulation is now. So we're down 4 to 3 alternates, 2 from the city of Asheville, and then 1 voting member and 1 alternate will be appointed by the Buncombe County Commission, which is, we currently just have 2 appointed by the commission.
So how many is that total?
How many total of the membership? How many total of the reduction?
Of the new membership.
So there are no new members. They're all a reduction. What we're saying is that there would be, okay, hold on. So there would be 4, 5 regulars?
There's
and
always
then
5.
3, yeah.
There's always 5 regulars.
Yeah, there's
These are
always
just
5
about
regulars.
the alternates. And
Yeah.
the reason that you want alternates for a Board of Adjustment is because you have to have 4/5 vote to a super majority to pass a variance. But 7 alternates is kind of overkill, and I don't know how often you call the alternates.
Yeah.
But so as long as you have some alternates that are trained in quasi-judicial procedures and you can call on them, or I guess what you were saying, Sam, is the county's supposed to have 5 alternates, but they just kept.
City of Asheville had 5, and then the county had 2, but what they've been doing is they've been, per the statutory law, it's been a little different. So I wasn't aware what you were asking. So yes, 5 members. We've always had more alternates than members, which getting people to attend meetings is hard. This is not as fun as Monday Night Football. It is hard, thankless work, so thank you for your presence here. But yes, this is just about a reduction because that's what the statutory compliance says, and we'll be down 4 alternates to just 3. So it will be 5 regular members, 3 alternates. 1 of the regular members will be appointed from the county.
Everybody clear?
Yeah.
So I
Had a question on the rules and of commissions. There's something that says boards may allow up to 30 minutes of public comment. So does that change all boards and commissions?
I think you're referencing a boards and commissions document that is not part of this package.
Oh,
That was circulated by the city
Yeah.
clerk and adopted by city council. We could certainly discuss and clarify questions of that after this.
That's what I call a Will Palmquist problem.
okay. All right, well, just let me know when that comes into play.
We'll put a pin on that one.
The only question I kind of had around was the published notice. I personally am not turning for a hard copy of the newspaper.
Yeah.
But I also know that, different age groups act in different ways, and I just worry that $700 is relatively little inside a $350 million budget annually to worry about, given the fact that, I may contend that one person finding that as valuable in their life and being able to publicly engage, that has value I've seen, particularly in the most marginalized communities. So I'd be interested to hear what others have to say, or if you have any insight as to people who are reporting because they heard in a newspaper clipping. But it's already pretty hard sometimes to know exactly what's going on. So if somebody who's in their 70s or 80s, which we have showing up at these meetings, catch the average age of the previous hearing we had, but it looked like there were folks in there who probably really rely on more traditional media. That would be a thought that sprung to mind.
Well, I can comment on that, and meeting attendance. The last meeting was a little bit of a statistical outlier just because it was involved in a legacy neighborhood. It was involved in the neighborhood that organizes best. Everything that happens in Shiloh is noticed, and they show up, and we love that. On average, most people who show up, again, because this is quasi-judicial, they have standing. They are typically a neighbor, so they see through the sign. And I hear what you're saying about the budget. I want to be clear that this comes out of the planning budget. And I would love it if we had $350 million for planning, but we do not. So that number is much, much, much smaller.
I'll also, if I could add to that, is there any hardship or burden right now on the administration? There's a time window when the notices have to appear. If there's some defect in the notice, it has to come, be continued, or, has that happened? Or
hasn't happened under my watch, but you are correct that if it doesn't go off, then we're going to have to renotice and do it again. It is a constant source of anxiety to always be on top of noticing for this.
Mr. Starbaum runs a tight ship over there at BOA.
No doubt.
Let the record show.
I want to
I'll look
note
for that in
too,
the minutes.
The notice procedures for quasi-judicial are different from legislative. So it's notice that you asked about 200 feet, but for quasi-judicial, it's only adjoining properties or the property owner because they have standing. And if you go to a quasi-judicial, you'll always hear the chair say, it doesn't mean you can't speak, but only people with standing should be considered in this decision. Well, we'll take your comments, but what they have to base evidence are people with standing. So it has in the past created confusion for the general public who comes, maybe because they saw it published in the paper. Nobody wants to be told, well, we can listen to you, but we can't really take what you're saying into consideration. So it was interesting you brought up the equity, because some people think a quasi-judicial procedure is antithetical to equity, because there are people that maybe they have an accessory dwelling unit they have what is that? A non-conforming
structure.
Yes, a structure. They'd like to use it as an ADU, but they don't want to go through the process, which costs $500 to get a variance. So you can see it both ways. So there's a process to go through, but that's a little bit of a tangent. But for the notice part, we do limit it even in our UDO, because as it's permitted by the statutes, and the statutes actually would allow legislative to only be adjoining property owners too, but the city chooses to broaden that. But in the case of quasi-judicial, it helps so that people realize that it's really supposed to be the impacted properties, which are adjoining property owners.
Yeah, thank you. I would just add to that even adjoining property owners who have the standing may not understand what's happening, and so it's important to have a notice to the general public and the neighborhood so that they can help engage those adjoining property owners to understand and be involved in the process.
Mailed notice. The adjoining properties get the mailed notice, and then the site itself is posted.
Right, so if an adjoining property owner gets the notice and disregards it because they have no idea what a quasi-judicial hearing is or what's happening, but there's another member in that community that understands the process more, and that member doesn't know because it hasn't been published, then there's a lack of information.
There's also the last meeting which was referenced, standing is often given to HOAs who sometimes are more well-funded, that can be educated down different channels and have different lived experiences and know how to stake a claim to standing. However, legacy neighborhoods have organizations that I would contend if made arguments that aligned with standard nomenclature for quasi-judicial hearings may actually be able to access standing.
Well, standing's pretty clear.
Well, clear to somebody who has experience.
No, wait, I'm just saying, I don't think any HOA would have standing. They would have to be adjacent, somehow affiliated with an adjacent property owner, so that they'd have to have adjacent property owner, and they have to show a special harm that they suffer. So there is something to it, but I'm just saying it's not just.
Well, I have an email clarifying it with the city. I'd be glad to read the email discussing the differences in the standing between HOAs and neighborhoods. So I've done my research on this, and to be clear, there are legacy neighborhoods who have not been given standing, who have dues-paying members of adjacent property. So to be clear, I think there is a very contentious argument to be made that I have direct experience with, and in this case, if someone who's in the leadership from a legacy neighborhood gains access through the advertisement of the newspaper instead of just the posting and just the adjacent properties, I think that's relevant.
That's good information to have. I didn't realize
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance to the conversation, and one-off instances is what quasi-judicial hearings are established for. And that's why we're here discussing, also the ADUs, is because it is not so much an anomaly as a reoccurring theme, and that's when I think we should trigger amendments to the ADU, or to the UDO. So just to be clear, the only thing inside the Board of Adjustments that I had concern with was the publicly noticing. And I personally would prefer that we maintain that public noticing process, especially, just because we don't know. It's hard to prove who receives what information and how that impacts our community. And I'd be glad to speak at City Council to encourage them to boost your budget to ensure that we can continue to paper notice folks, but I would love to hear other commissioners' thoughts and maybe it's just one knucklehead.
So to answer my original question, there is concern consternation on section 7520, which would leave 733, 761, and 762 that I haven't heard any questions about. So 714.1, the ADU, 7520, the notice. The questions about the composition. We're really whittling this down, but I just want to be clear on kind of like where there's no question or concern before we open for public comment.
Yeah, I was just seeking clarity to make sure that there were clear bookends on where we were at the stage of this particular agenda item.
Can we get feedback from staff or commissioners on separating out those when we proceed to a vote, or should we do that after public comment?
Let's hear public comment, and then maybe in our further deliberations, we can see where it's heading. Any other questions for staff before we open public comment? All right. Thank you, Mr. Starbaum. At 7:52, we will open for public comment.
Thank you for your time.
Please introduce yourself, state your name, and share your comments with us.
Yes. Good evening, Chair, commissioners, and staff. My name is Sekou Coleman, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Legacy Neighborhoods Coalition, which includes leaders from the neighborhood associations of the Burton Street, East End Valley Street, Emma, Southside, and Shiloh neighborhoods. We respectfully urge the Planning and Zoning Commission to delay sending the proposed UDO zoning amendments for 714-1 to City Council at this time. LNC leaders and Legacy residents are only just beginning to receive and process the full scope of these changes, specifically those related to the ADU regulations. Thanks to a newly established liaison with this commission, Chair Barton, community leaders from our Legacy neighborhoods are now gaining access to deeper and more detailed information. But this process is still in the early stages. Our leaders are actively reviewing the materials, but they need more time to fully understand the implications, particularly as they relate to potential displacement or unintended consequences for historically marginalized communities. Delaying this decision would allow for more informed engagement, better questions, and more thoughtful responses from our communities, many of whom are just now in a position to turn their attention to these critical zoning issues. It would also support a more equitable planning process that respects the pace at which residents from these neighborhoods are able to engage. We're not asking to halt the process, only to ensure that progress includes those who have historically been left out of the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will close the public comment at 7:54. Appreciate the feedback and comment and affirmation that Legacy neighborhoods are engaged in the evaluation of land use changes. I think this is something that has been a longstanding commitment of the city, however, with uneven kind of reception and progress. So looking forward to kind of more robust engagement with Legacy neighborhoods, especially as applies the recommendations in the missing middle housing report and the acute attention to areas of our city that are vulnerable. So points well taken, and appreciate you showing up tonight for what would have been a much longer meeting and ended up being just a regularly long meeting. So, any further questions, deliberation, thoughts on how or what could proceed at this time?
So can we separate out the 7-14-1 and proceed to vote on the other amendments first?
Do we have staff feedback on separation, or would that be something that's given to the discretion of this commission to provide in a motion?
Yeah, however the commission wants to proceed, I'm looking at Janice, but I think we would just need separate motions if you separate them out, the amendments. Reason no?
You want separate motions, and then if it's something gets voted down, it still goes on, or do you want to continue certain sections? And that's really, it's a staff decision, but we have had in the past where you might vote for some things, you might not vote, you might deny something, but it still goes on to council. So it's just where staff is at and what you think that there can be more time.
I think, yeah, I think the cleanest way forward, and we are open to working together, of course, is that to separate these and to have the 4 BOAs, 7.3, 7.5, 7.61, and 7.62, and then a separate motion for 7.14. That way we can work with engaging and scheduling council a little different, but all options are on the table.
Thank you for that.
And I would address what Janice said too. If what you think is needed is more time and engagement, we would entertain a continuance over denial because we still think there's merit to the amendment.
Certainly, and I believe that's in the spirit of what we were hearing, a request from community members and other members of this commission, was just kind of more time to assess information. I think absent time, we end up doing something reactionary, which could be, do we apply Appendix 7F, which I know is administratively complex and maybe not supported by staff. So I think a cleaner approach could be just to allow more time for engagement and consideration. Do we want to, so if that's where this seems to be heading on 714.1, do we want to talk a little bit more about the notice requirements, hearing some concerns from fellow commissioners around alleviating publication and newspaper for quasi-judicial?
I second I think it was a really good point that was brought up about neighbors helping to be, in some neighborhoods, community looks different than in others, and neighbors helping neighbors try to understand things that are happening adjacent to them, I think is really important to consider. And sometimes those things get missed when we're trying to do these text changes, and maybe, because we're sitting here from a place of privilege, we say, okay, if I get a notice, I'm the one getting the notice, I'm the one withstanding, but maybe, we're not considering well enough, I think, what you brought up earlier. I hear that, and I just wanted to say that I think I kind of follow suit.
So I guess we have a couple of options on the broader BOA proposals. There could be a recommendation to deny the changes to 7520, the publication notice. That one feels like there's not a desire for more time, or is there an information request? It's more a, we have the information, or is there further information that this commission requires in order to evaluate that one?
I think it's just a matter, to me, it's a matter of weighing the confusion that some people get from this public notice in print versus potential benefit that it could be providing that we just don't know that we might
And if I may, Chair, just on this one, and please let me know if I am overstepping my bounds here, is that staff does have a preference on 7520 particularly, that you do vote, if you choose to vote that one down, as you do vote that as a recommendation to move forward to council. I do want to stress the fiscal responsibility component. There was a $15 million budget shortfall last year. We will have another very, very, very tight budget this year. There are cuts all over. Hiring FTEs is difficult, and this is something we're looking to move forward with pretty quickly, because everything is, we're counting pennies in every department right now.
Understood. It feels like the questions raised are more about the effect of information sharing rather than the mechanism. I think we're all sympathetic to administrative efficiencies and costs. I guess if this were to be a continuance, then perhaps is there an option that replaces publication by newspaper with alternative cost-free means of disseminating information? And I don't know what that looks like tonight. I just wonder if is there any appetite for staff to explore that, or is this kind of an either or?
There's not an either or. There's always a third option, and I hear Commissioner Wheatley. I agree that every generation receives information differently. It would be hard to do a like for like, but we can certainly engage with Kate between now and council and come up with a number of different solutions. Of course, Instagram is not the same and would not have the same audience, but I mean, that's something we thought of between the last time I sat down and got back up. So I think there's absolutely an appetite to explore alternative options that are in-house and can be done with our own departments.
What about notifying neighborhood associations? I mean, that's just one we would pick, or something. I mean, since there's no rule about having to do a particular type of notice, there was just that kind of additional notice, would that
Yeah,
help?
no, I think I think that's a good solution.
No, I think that's, like, that hits the nail on the head perfectly, you know.
And if I may, for example, in TRC, if you are doing a major subdivision or a level 2 development, you are required to do certain types of noticing. And then if you are in a neighborhood association, there is special noticing requirement. So we can copy that from TRC.
Would this commission feel comfortable with a recommendation tonight conditional upon inserting language to provide notice through alternate means to neighborhood associations? Does that feel like a solution? So I think we're there on Board of Adjustment stuff. Would anybody like to make a motion or hear me out on a tortured attempt?
I can make the tortured attempt, or I can second your tortured attempt, either way.
Go ahead.
All right. Make sure I've got the right ordinance referenced.
So one challenge with the prepared motion is consistency statement number 3 is really only applicable to the 714 one, so we may want to eliminate
Yeah,
that one.
for sure.
I want to start with the continuance.
That's a good point, yeah. So let's start with, is there a motion to continue the portion of the staff recommendation related to section 714.1 concerning ADUs, accessory structures?
I don't want to make the motion, but can we continue it? Can we give it 2 months instead of 1 month?
I think that would be wise.
I would
given
recommend
the-
that.
Yep. So would the date certain be October?
Yeah, okay.
October 1st? Okay. I'll make a motion to continue the portion of the zoning text amendments related to section 14.1 ADUs to date certain October 1st.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion to continue passes unanimously. And now to revisit the remaining items on the table. Commissioner Wheatley, you want to?
I move to recommend the approval of the of the proposed wording amendments to chapter 7.3, 7.5, and 7.6 of the Asheville Code of Ordinances, and find that the proposed, with an amendment to 7.520, recommending that the city establish a standard of disseminating information with regards to the Board of Adjustments to associated neighborhood organizations, and find that the proposed amendments are reasonable, are in the public interest, are consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meet the development needs of the community, and that the amendments will, 1, align boards and commissions with statutory requirements, and 2, improve the efficiency of the city's operations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Commissioner Wheatley, for helping land that plane. That brings us to the end of our formal agenda items. Before we make a motion to adjourn, there was some information shared around applicants to fill the vacant seat on Planning and Zoning Commission. I know this is not on the agenda, but could we have a quick dialogue around recommendations to pass to City Council? I just wanted to kind of share with everyone else, given the immediacy of the loss of our fellow commissioner, Byron, the speed at which appointment of a new member feels kind of out of step, and it's my opinion that we should advise City Council to slow down the process, reopen the application, for interested applicants, but I wanted feedback from the full commission before I relay that request. If there's any thoughts.
I certainly second that. I think giving time for our healing and processing and just time for more applicants to be interested and go through the process and be able to talk to us. You know, a lot of applicants have one-on-one conversations with one of us or other staff, and we need more time for that.
Thank you.
I would agree as well.
Does anyone have concern with me speaking on behalf of the commission to relay this request to reopen applications and take a little more time?
Chair Barton, I just want to say I appreciate your leadership on this. Commissioner Greiner's leaving a tremendous hole of knowledge, skill, experience, community engagement, support, connection here on this commission, and I don't think that's filling that kind of hole is not something that I think can be done quickly or you know, kind of without consideration for the healing that as a commission we should go through.
Thank you. Okay, I will certainly relay this you know, on behalf of the full commission and pass along any response I get. So thank you. And with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Our next meeting is September
3rd.